I'm honored to welcome former Representative Debbie Mucarsel-Powell, who represented the 26th District in South Florida, known to her legion of supporters in Florida as Debbie. She is the Democratic nominee for U.S. Senator for Florida, running against its former governor, Rick Scott. Debbie has a fascinating and uniquely American origin story that she will share with our audience, the Meidas Mighty, the Legal AFers today. As a rising star of the Democratic Party, she's not just running against Scott and the GOP. She's running for many principles and values that align with those of our audience. But I want to focus on the Republican and MAGA assault on women's rights and equality. It didn't begin with Dobbs 2 years ago, ripping away a 50-year constitutional woman's right to choose. 23 states since Dobbs now ban abortion or effectively ban it by lowering the weeks to 6. And Florida and Texas have joined together to attack civil rights and liberties, and that's not just the stuff of recent movie fiction. For women in Florida, come May 1, it is a dystopic reality. The Florida Supreme Court has put the issue and what kind of Florida will exist for women and Debbie's candidacy squarely before the voters. As of May 1, they have allowed the DeSantis ban on abortion to be and the weeks to be lowered from 15 weeks to just 6 weeks. And that's been endorsed and pushed by Debbie's opponent, Rick Scott, with the Supreme Court finding that there was no Florida constitutional right to privacy that included a right for a woman to exercise bodily autonomy. But at the same time, the Supreme Court of Florida put on the November 5 ballot, right alongside a vote for Debbie, Amendment 4, to amend the Florida Constitution to expressly add a right of a woman to choose. It's under the title Amendment to Limit Government Interference with Abortion. The initiative would provide a constitutional right to abortion before fetal viability, which is estimated at approximately 24 weeks, or when necessary to protect the patient's health, as determined by the patient's healthcare provider. But between May 1 and November, there are thousands of Florida women that will be forced by the state to have children against their personal choice. That amendment needs 60% of the Florida electorate to vote for it to pass. Debbie needs one vote over 50%. And there's no better person to discuss these critical issues to women and people who support women's equality and reproductive choice in Florida with our Legal AF and MeidasTouch audience than Debbie. Debbie, I welcome you to our show.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael.
So, Debbie, you're fighting. You're fighting for Florida. You're fighting for women of Florida. Tell the audience who may not know your background, your origin story, why you've decided to run for Senate. Where do you come from? What's your background? And why are you the proper choice for Floridians as they choose their next senator?
Yeah, Michael, in Florida, we have been ground zero for attacks against our freedoms and our most basic fundamental rights. And just like in 2018, where I felt that shift happening on the ground, the need for change, for good representation, it's exactly what I've been feeling now for a few months here in the state of Florida. My mother had the courage to bring my sisters and I over 35 years ago from our home country of Ecuador, looking for opportunities, looking for freedoms, the freedoms that right now are under attacks, particularly for women here in the state of Florida. I watched my mom, wake up really early in the morning. She worked 12-hour shifts. She started cleaning houses. I actually helped her do some of those jobs. And I started working at a minimum wage job at the age of 15 at a donut shop. And because of those opportunities, I'm talking to you right now as the top Latina Democratic candidate here in the state of Florida. And this is only possible in America. I mean, so many people would say that somebody like myself, who came with a mother that didn't speak the language, someone that started working with a minimum wage salary, would never be able to graduate from college, get a master's degree, become an associate dean at the medical school here at FIU in Miami, one of the largest Hispanic serving institutions, or for that matter, be elected to serve in Congress. But I've always known that in this country, when you have those opportunities, and if you work hard enough and if you believe hard enough, anything is possible. Unfortunately, my story should be the rule, but now it's becoming an exception because of extreme attacks against our freedoms, because of extremists like Rick Scott. Look, it's been such an incredible honor for me to have become the first South American immigrant to ever serve in the U.S. House of Representatives. When I was in Congress, I worked to make sure that we passed gun safety reforms. Gun violence is very personal to me. When I was 24 years old, I lost my father to gun violence, and it was something that really changed my life forever. And I met so many Floridians here who have felt that pain, the same call that I received when I was 24 years old. We saw it in Orlando at Pulse. We saw it at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas when those parents received that devastating call. And it is the greatest moral failure to me that we have people like Rick Scott, extremists like Rick Scott, that are with the gun lobby and do nothing while our children continue to die because of this senseless gun violence epidemic. And when I was in Congress, using my healthcare background, I made sure that I wrote a bill to expand Medicare coverage. And Rick Scott was writing his 12-point plan to sunset, eliminate Medicare, Social Security, repeal the Affordable Care Act in a state where we have the largest number of seniors who rely on those benefits. Look, Rick Scott is a complete fraud. Most Floridians know who he is, but they also know that he was the CEO of a company that committed the largest Medicare fraud in the history of this country. They know that he was someone that banned the term climate change here when he was governor, who has been attacking women's freedoms from the very beginning. He was very proud and celebrated overturning Roe v. Wade. And like you mentioned, now we're facing the most extreme ban on abortion, a 6-week ban that goes into effect May 1st here in our state. And Rick Scott has said that he would proudly have signed into law that abortion ban. Well, I think that his luck is running out, and he is going to face the consequences of his actions in November.
Let's talk about that, Debbie. And a little bit of a disclosure. I know Debbie well. I would have called her Debbie even if we weren't doing the interview and it wasn't her campaign slogan. I've known her for almost 20 years. We have some mutual friends in common in Florida. I supported her when she ran for Congress from the 26th. And as soon as I heard that she was going to run for Senate, and especially against Rick Scott, I said, what can we do to help? Let's try to use this platform. Let's focus, our audience comes to us, and Legal AF in particular, because they want to sit at that intersection of law and politics and justice. And let's talk about Amendment 4, what it means to you and your campaign, and what your platform is as it relates to women, their reproductive rights, and equality.
Yeah, look, I'm really concerned as a woman, as a mother of 2 daughters. I have a son as well, but I'm really concerned that this extreme ban, with hardly any exceptions to rape and incest, is going to put the safety, the health, the lives of tens of thousands of women at risk here in our state. We were the state of last resort for many states in the South. 1 in 5 women that were getting this abortion care, this reproductive health care here in the state, were coming from southern states. And actually, many women from Latin America travel here to Florida to get that care. I am so worried that we are going to immediately see a high rate of maternal mortality. We're going to see an increase in violence against women. One of the things that I've always said, Michael, is that democracy, freedom, goes hand in hand with women's rights. And it should be no surprise to everyone watching today that as we are seeing this erosion of democratic institutions, as we are seeing attacks against democracy, they are specifically attacking women's rights and freedoms. Because when women organize, when we create a movement, we win, and we also strengthen our democracy. And so this is a strategic attack against women. It is central to the dignity of a woman to be able to make that decision between herself, her family, her doctor, and her faith. It should be completely free of government interference. As someone that came from Latin America, I know exactly what it looks like to have a government dictate what happens in those private matters and private decisions. And I can tell you honestly that, yes, we have an amendment here that people are going to have the opportunity to vote on this ballot amendment, but it's not going to mean anything if people vote for the ballot amendment and then re-elect Rick Scott, because he will push for a national abortion ban. He is a proud supporter of the former president, and we have seen time and time again that it was because of him that he appointed these Supreme Court justices that overturned Roe v. Wade. This has been a coordinated and a strategic plan for the right-wing extremists like Rick Scott and Trump, and they will pass a federal abortion ban. Make no mistake, and they're not going to stop with stopping that access for women. They're going to prevent families from having access to IVF. They are going to make it impossible for women to have access to contraception. Trump already tried that when I was in Congress, so that insurance companies didn't cover contraception for women, if you remember. And so this is a strategic and coordinated attack that will not stop with just the state of Florida. They will do it at a national level. That's why these elections are so important for our freedom and for our democracy.
And let's put a fine point on it, Debbie. The Democrats need to not only hold, but increase their majority in the Senate in order for the dystopian landscape that you just outlined to stop it from happening. The Democrats have a slim majority it's better than in the House, obviously, at the Senate level, but that's where the rubber meets the road on things like Supreme Court nominee confirmation, which matters. And for anybody that thinks that Biden, once reelected, is not going to have an opportunity to reshape the Supreme Court, then you don't understand the way life works. Somebody's going to retire and or naturally pass on that Supreme Court. And I don't know which side of the aisle that's going to happen, but you have to have the right president and the right senator in Debbie representing the state of Florida and ready to vote for the right Supreme Court nominee. Otherwise, you end up with a permanent, and what we don't want is a permanent 6-3 super MAGA majority on the United States Supreme Court. And it's not just the Supreme Court. It's on, as you said, Debbie, the federal laws that could be proposed by a restoration of the Trump presidency that has to be opposed by strong leaders like you, but you can't do it from the sidelines. You got to be in the game, and we got to get you in the game. What can our audience, many of which are in Florida, that's obvious, vote for Debbie in early voting early voting or on election day. I almost pulled the Republican trick there. Vote twice. But there's things that people, and I get asked all the time, I get stopped on the street in New York who know that I'm on the show. What can we do and where can we do it? Where should we put we're willing to fly, Michael. Where should we go? Debbie, how can our audience help you get elected?
Well, thank you, Michael. First of all, let me just say that I am the only Latina Democrat running for U.S. Senate. We only have one Latina, it's Catherine Cortez Masto. We need more representation. We need more women in the Senate. We lost California and Arizona to female seats, and only women are going to make women's healthcare, childcare, family resources at the center of every decision that they make in the Senate. So I take the responsibility of not only being a woman running for Senate, but also a Latina woman very seriously, especially with these issues, because they disproportionately affect women of color. Look, I'm going to need everyone watching right now to go to my website, debbieforflorida.com, make a contribution. Rick Scott put over $60 million of his own money to buy his Senate seat, money that he took from Medicare fraud. And he barely won. He only won by 10,000 votes, 0.001% actually. And he's never run in a presidential election. He's extremely unpopular. He's the most vulnerable Republican that we have here in the state. And so this is a huge opportunity, and it will be the top pickup opportunity for us to keep the Senate majority. Go to debbieforflorida.com. Please also sign up to volunteer. We're going to be having phone banks. Anywhere you are in the country, you can help me not only remind people that they have to come out and vote, but they have to re-register to vote by mail. Some people have been marked inactive. Republicans here have been purging voters off the rolls. When you see that increase in Republicans voter registration, it's not that they have registered that many more voters. It's that they have purged mostly Democrats and independent votes from the rolls. And so those are inactive voters that can still vote. We have to give them the information that's needed so that they can participate in the August primary and also in November. And I'm going to need people to fly down here and knock on doors. We are not going to disappoint. This continues to be one of the most beautiful states that we have here in the country. We're going to have a very well organized ground operation. We are coordinating with different groups as well. I know that the national groups are going to make investments here in the state of Florida, and it's going to be critical as we see the 270 electoral votes. The president has said that Florida is in play. I am so glad to see that all the attention is now coming down to Florida. The vice president is visiting once again our state because they're seeing what I have been feeling on the ground. Floridians are ready to reject extremism, and we're ready to win. So I hope everyone supports. Sign up to volunteer. I need you with me, and I know that we can do this together.
I think in just the 15 minutes or so that our audience has been maybe first time exposed to you, they can see the reason that we've got to get Debbie into the U.S. Senate for all of the historic reasons that she mentioned, but just because of her personal, her character, her leadership. I mean, as you were going through your points, I wrote to my producer here, we got to get Debbie back to D.C. I mean, this is like a no-brainer. And I commit to do everything that I can. Well, you and I will talk offline. I'll talk to your campaign about what I can do. I'm down, and as people know, I'm down in Florida regularly. I've got a law firm and a practice down there, and I will coordinate with your campaign. And those that are interested, go on the website, donate, as Debbie just said, but also reach out to her campaign and try to coordinate some of the efforts in your own home states or flying down to help her where it's critical. When does do you know when early voting starts in Florida this year?
It's sometime mid-November, October. Sorry, we have a 2-week early voting period here in October, and most of our base actually votes during early voting, and we also use, of course, vote by mail. The ballots actually, Michael, they're printed and they're mailed out end of September. So we really have about 6 months to make sure that people know what's on the ballot. Freedom is on the ballot. Democracy is on the ballot. Women's rights are on the ballot. We need to do everything possible to make sure that we vote and we support and maintain our democracy and our freedoms that are so integral to the values of America.
Representative Debbie Mucarsel-Powell running for the U.S. Senate in Florida against Rick Scott. As a Democrat, we need to support her. Debbie, real pleasure to have you on. I want to have you back on as you continue your campaign, and we'll find ways, this audience, I'm sure, will find ways to support you.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Heary, heary, Legal AF Law Breakdown is now in session. Go beyond the headlines and get a deep dive into the important legal concepts you need to know, and we discuss every day on Legal AF. Exclusive content you won't find anywhere else, all for the price of a couple of cups of coffee. Join us at patreon.com/legalaf. That's patreon.com/legalaf.